The Vatican says, we worship the same God as the Muslims do and the Talmudists do. You know what? The Vatican is right. All right, everyone. So I want to talk to you guys about an unknown character in Catholic history, and that is Jacob van Hoogstraten. Hoogstraten was a Flemish inquisitor, and as an inquisitor, he was in charge of hunting down heresy. That was this guy's job. He was the head of the Inquisition in several regions of Germany, and his job was to hunt down heretics. He was to find heretics. That was his job. And while he was an inquisitor, he heard about this guy named Johann Reuchlin. Johann Reuchlin was an occultist. He was a wizard. And Johann Reuchlin was pushing for the Kabbalah. He was pushing for Kabbalism. He was pushing for this idea of syncretism between Christianity and the Talmud and the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah is Jewish occultism. Books like the Zohar, that is the Kabbalah. And Reuchlin was a part of this trend of the Renaissance, which wanted a harmony between Christianity and Jewish occultism, in this belief that by looking at the Kabbalah, we could better understand the Trinity, better understand God. Of course, this was all a deception, but this evil was being preached in the Renaissance period. People think that back in the day, people were so trad, Europeans were so trad, and they were just hardcore Catholics. But even in those days, there was evil in the Catholic world. There was evil in the Vatican. They were people in the upper echelons of Catholic power who wanted the advancement of Jewish occultism, who wanted to see the advancement of the Hermetic occultic system, and they wanted to revive Egyptian paganism and Greco-Roman paganism. So this whole idea that, back in those days it was trad, it's just stupidity. A lot of this stuff is just craziness, and it's just ultra idealism. But anyway, back to Jacob van Hoogstraten. Hoogstraten did not like this movement that wanted to advance Kabbalism. He hated it, and he wanted to destroy it. So he said that this Johann Reuchlin guy is a heretic. He is trying to spread Talmudism and Kabbalism under the veneer of trying to better understand God. And so Reuchlin was put on trial for heresy. He was put on trial for heresy, and the Vatican sent a representative to oversee the trial. This representative was the Bishop of Speyer, and this bishop was sympathetic to Reuchlin's Kabbalistic movement, and so he declared on behalf of the Vatican that Reuchlin was not a heretic, and that Hoogstraten was the bad guy. Hoogstraten was the bad guy. So Hoogstraten was punished with having to pay the legal fees of Reuchlin. This was his punishment. But Hoogstraten did not want to abide by this punishment, and so he appealed. He made an appeal. And he continued to preach against Reuchlin. He said, I'm not going to pay for this wizard's legal fees. I'm not going to do this. And I want to appeal the verdict of the trial. And he continued to preach against Reuchlin. Well, what ended up happening was a German warlord stepped in. A German warlord by the name of Franz von Sickingen. And Sickingen was a fanatic follower for Reuchlin. In fact, he wrote a pamphlet in defense of Reuchlin. And Franz von Sickingen, or Sickingen, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but anyway, Mr. Sicko went to the Dominicans because Hoogstraten was a Dominican, and he told the Dominicans, you better silence this Hoogstraten guy or you're going to be in trouble. So the Dominicans, they were intimidated by this guy. This guy was a military expert. He was a military, he was someone who had a lot of military prowess. This was not somebody that you wanted to mess with. So the Dominicans silenced Hoogstraten, and he was shut down. And the pressure to pay for Reuchlin's legal fees increased and intensified. So Hoogstraten was reduced to obscurity. That was the fate of Hoogstraten. That is what the papal powers ended up doing to Hoogstraten, the elites. And Hoogstraten ended up being a very obscure person in the intellectual world. No one talks about Hoogstraten today, but people today still talk about Johann Reuchlin, because Johann Reuchlin was a part of the intelligentsia. He was a part of the Catholic intellectual elite. In fact, Reuchlin wrote a book on the Kabbalah, and he dedicated the book to Pope Leo X. And Pope Leo X had someone write to Reuchlin that he really loved the book. So Pope Leo X loved the Kabbalah, he loved the wizard Johann Reuchlin, but Hoogstraten, the inquisitor who was trying to stop the advancement of Jewish occultism, he was reduced to obscurity. That was what happened to Hoogstraten. So all this, this whole idea of trad Catholicism, going back to tradition, going back to, before Vatican II and all this stuff. Well, let's go back to the days before Vatican II. Let's go back to the 16th century. Let's go back to the 15th century, and we will see occultism. We will see people high up there in the Vatican supporting people like Johann Reuchlin and destroying people like Hoogstraten. And Hoogstraten was not the only person. There was also a man by the name of Johannes Pfefferkorn. Pfefferkorn was a Jewish man. He was raised Jewish, and he converted to Catholicism, and he became a scholar, and he also became someone who really brought the realities of the Talmud to the Catholic public in Europe. He began to expose the blasphemies that are taught in the Talmud, and he was against the Kabbalah, but he was also very much so against the trending movement at the time to advance Kabbalism. And so he was against this humanist movement. And Hoogstraten was an ally of Pfefferkorn. Hoogstraten was defending Pfefferkorn. The elites like Reuchlin were against people like Pfefferkorn and Hoogstraten. In fact, one of the most prominent intellectuals of the time, Erasmus, was against Hoogstraten, was against the movement that was trying to stop the advancement of Kabbalism at the time. Erasmus wanted the advancement of Kabbalism. He defended Reuchlin. Erasmus was a very double-minded person. He was very dishonest and deceptive in the sense that he would tell people that he wanted nothing to do with Reuchlin, but he would also go against Hoogstraten. He would go against Pfefferkorn. He hated Pfefferkorn. He hated Pfefferkorn. He would say things like, "Oh, Pfefferkorn, he's just a half Jew. He's just a half Jew." He hated Pfefferkorn, even though Pfefferkorn was a Jewish man who was trying to expose the Talmud, expose the occultism of Judaism. And there was this, this grand intellectual elite that people still talk about today, Erasmus, defending an occultist against someone who was trying to stop occultism. How does this make sense? Well, it doesn't make sense in a Christian Orthodox sense, but it makes sense in the sense that Catholicism, Roman Catholicism, was rotten. It was rotten. And I can give you more examples. For example, Pius V, Pope Pius V. Pope Pius V, when he was a cardinal, Cardinal Michele Ghisleri, he defended the Zohar. Yes, he defended the Zohar. Very interesting. There was this place in Italy called Cremona. In Cremona, they were going to print out copies of the Zohar and all that. And there was this Cardinal Giles of Viterbo, or Cardinal Giles Viterbo. Cardinal Giles Viterbo was a major cardinal, very influential. He backed Reuchlin, and he wanted to see the mass printing of the Zohar, the preservation of the Zohar. And there were many copies of the Zohar in a place called Cremona. The people in Cremona they didn't want the Kabbalah in their town. And so there was this big outcry. Well, Cardinal Michele Ghisleri sent a Jewish occultist by the name of Sixtus of Siena to go to Cremona and burn a copy of, I think it was either the Talmud or the Kabbalah. I'm pretty certain it was the Talmud. Anyway, regardless. So the book was burned, and the people thought, okay, well, our protests have been adhered to. After this show was done, this was all a show. Again, the Vatican was trying to show, oh, we're so trad. Look at us, we're so trad. We're going to burn a copy of the Talmud. Behind everybody's backs, Cardinal Michele Ghisleri, who would later become Pope Pius V, preserved 2,000 copies of the Zohar and had them sent somewhere else. Yes, this was Pope Pius V. This was the Pope who was sitting on the seat of Peter during the Battle of Lepanto. Oh yes, the great Battle of Lepanto. And he was for saving the Zohar. The book that says that sacrifices must be done to appeal to the demonic forces. This is what the Zohar preaches, that a sacrifice must be done to please the demons. It's a demonic book. And here was a cardinal saving this occultist book. But people talk about, oh, the Catholic Church is so anti-Semitic. That's a bunch of nonsense. There's so much stupidity out there. So much stupidity out there. And even in the Renaissance period, you had this appeal, not appeasement. I don't want to use the word appeasement because then it sounds like people are doing things out of fear. But you have this harlotry, really harlotry, the prostituting of God's house happening right there, centuries ago, right there. But people look back and they have this idealization of the past, and they had this idea that there is this golden era of Catholicism. I remember speaking to a guy who was an Oxford graduate from Italy. He graduated. He was a graduate in medieval history in Oxford. Very educated guy, Italian guy. Spoke in a perfect English accent, even though he was Italian, born and raised in Italy for most of his life, even though he lived for some time in England studying, but spoke in a perfect English accent. And he told me, he says, there was no golden age of Christendom. It doesn't exist. It's a myth that people believe in. And he was right. At that time, I heard him, and in my idealism, I kind of blew off what he told me. But studying this history, I realized, no, that guy was right. That guy was right. And, people talk about Pius V. This was a guy who saved the Zohar. He preserved 2,000 copies of the Zohar. And people say, oh, he was such a great pope. Now, I really liked Pope Pius V. I really liked him. I write about him in my last book because he was the pope. He was pope during the Battle of Lepanto. The Battle of Lepanto was a naval battle in which the Christians defeated the Ottoman Empire. Great story. And this was after years of Christians getting their asses kicked in naval battles by the Ottoman Empire. And finally, the Christians got a victory, a naval victory against the Ottomans. And this victory was done by the Holy League. Pius V created the Holy League. He founded the Holy League. The Holy League was a Catholic army consisting of Catholic fighters from all throughout Christendom. And the thing is that, yes, the Holy League defeated the Ottomans in the Battle of Lepanto, but literally 2 years after the Battle of Lepanto, the Holy League was disbanded. Well, what happened? What happened? What happened to this Holy League? Why was it disbanded? It's very sad, but looking at this history from the Renaissance period, you find occultism in the Vatican, occultism being advanced by Catholic elites like Cardinal Viterbo, like Pope Leo X, like Cardinal Michele Ghisleri, who would later become Pope Pius V, like Alexander VI, who also advanced Kabbalism and this idea of reviving Egyptian paganism. Pico della Mirandola, here's another one. Pico della Mirandola, his writings were demonic, his writings were occultic. And yet, Pico della Mirandola's work was considered not heretical by Pope Alexander VI. Well, here is a quote from Pico della Mirandola. "The letters of the name of the evil spirit, Satan, who is the prince of this world, and of the three-letter name of God, are the same. And whoever knows how to order the transposition can deduce one from another." So here you have Pico della Mirandola saying that God and Satan are the same. And you know what? In his religion, his God is Satan. So yes, according to Pico della Mirandola's worldview, God is the devil. His God is Satan. That's why he teaches this. The Vatican preaches that the God of Islam, the God of the Jews, the God of Judaism, I should say, because Jews, they are an ethnic group and they can worship the true God, just like anyone else. The God of the Talmud, the God of Kabbalah, the God of Islam are the same God as the Christian God. This is what the Vatican teaches in Vatican II. You know what? The God of the Vatican is the same God as Islam and the same God of Talmudism and Kabbalism. The Vatican says, we worship the same God as the Muslims do and the Talmudists do. You know what? The Vatican is right. Because the Vatican worships the God of Islam. The Vatican worships Satan. Yeah, you do worship the same God as the Muslims do. You worship the devil. And the Catholic Church is obsessed with interfaith dialogue. And you have these trad Catholics that are like, everything is great. Oh, yes, because Jesus told Peter that the gates of hell shall not prevail. Well, in the Vatican, the gates of hell prevailed. And what does that tell me? It tells me that the Vatican is not the true church. Simple as that. Simple as that. The moment you start saying things like, well, the God of Islam is actually the same God that the Christians worship, and the God of the Kabbalists is also the same God, and we can have Pachamama here, and she's the Virgin Mary. The moment you start doing this harlotry, you've just opened the door to anything. Anything. You've opened the door to the same teachings of Pico della Mirandola. God and the devil are the same. And the work of Pico della Mirandola was given the blessing of Pope Alexander VI. Worse than Vatican II. Worse than Vatican II. Worse than Vatican II. And I remember years ago, back in 2017, I got into a debate with a trad Catholic. His name is Martin Zellner, Austrian Nazi trad Catholic. You can watch it. It's still on YouTube. And he believes that, and he's an Austrian Catholic, and he believes that there can be some kind of harmony between Christianity and pre-Christian European paganism, Germanic paganism, like, Odin, Thor, all that stuff. And I confronted him on this, and he said, well, Catholics in the past went to Platonism, Neoplatonism, which is rooted in paganism. So if the Catholics of the past could go to Platonism, then why can't I bring in Thor into Christianity or bring in Odin? Why can't I have this harmony? And I confronted him on this, and I debated him on this. But really, what Martin Zellner was saying was not... It wasn't exactly anti-Catholic. It was the logical conclusion of Roman Catholicism today. Because the moment you start saying, well, the Islamic God is the same as the Catholic God, well, why can't Odin also be the same? Why can't Thor also be brought in? I mean, if we're going to bring in Pachamama, why not bring in the Germanic goddess Freya? Why not? What's stopping me from doing so? What? The Islamic God is a pagan god. They kiss this Kaaba in Mecca. The Kaaba is a giant vagina. That's what the Kaaba is. The Kaaba is a giant vagina. It's a fertility idol, and the Muslims kiss it. So why can't I bring in Freya and Thor and Odin? And why not? Bring in the whole party. Bring in the whole party. And people will say, oh, but, there's nothing wrong with the Kabbalah, because with the Kabbalah we can help teach Jews that God is triune. Well, why can't we go to the Old Testament? Why can't we go to the Old Testament? Why do we have to go to the Kabbalah, which is demonic? Why do we have to go to the Zohar, which is demonic? Why do we have to go to the Talmud, which is full of blasphemy? Why? Why can't we go to the book of Ezekiel? Go to the first chapter of the book of Ezekiel. It's very fascinating. I was reading it a couple of days ago. Very fascinating. Right there in the first chapter, Ezekiel has this vision. He sees this giant angelic creature with multiple faces and multiple wings. And then above this angelic creature is this expanse of light. And the colors of the rainbow are radiating throughout in this expanse. And then above this expanse, Ezekiel sees a man. He sees a man. And Ezekiel says that this man was the image of the glory of God. And Ezekiel says, I fell down and worship. And the Muslims and the Jews say, God cannot be a man. But here is Ezekiel bowing down to a man that he sees in heaven, and he says that this man is the image or the likeness of the glory of God. He saw God as a man. And what does St. Paul say in his letter to the Hebrews? He says that Jesus Christ is the image of the glory of the Father. Right there in Ezekiel, Ezekiel sees a man and he says, I see the image of the glory of God. And then it says, and the Spirit fell upon the prophet Ezekiel. So he sees the image of the glory of God, the Father. So he sees a man who is the image of the glory of God the Father, and the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, fell on him. Right there in one chapter of the Old Testament, you find the Trinity. The image of the glory of the Father, Jesus Christ, the Father, and the Spirit falling upon Ezekiel, the Holy Spirit. Right there, the triune God. In the book of Ezekiel, chapter 1. Why can't we go just to the Old Testament, the Torah? Why do we have to go to the Kabbalah? Why do we have to go to the Quran? Because it's not about preaching to Jews. It's about deception. It's demonic. So when Catholics say, oh, we worship the same God as the Muslims, we worship the same God as the Kabbalists, they're right. You worship the devil. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.